And welcome everyone to the Out of the Box Progressive Vaishnavism Second Annual Conference. We are kicking things off here this morning with Hari-kirtana Das. So Hari-kirtana is a yoga teacher, online course creator, spiritual mentor, and the author of two fantastic books. Journey into the Bhagavad Gita, a guide to exploring timeless principles of transcendental knowledge and integrating them into your life, and his first book, In Search of Highest Truth, Adventures in Yoga Philosophy. Hari-kirtana joined ISKCON in 1977 and was initiated by Satsvarupa Das Goswami in 1978. He has served ISKCON over the years in a wide range of capacities, worked for Fortune 500 companies and for Silicon Valley startups, and brings a wide range of spiritual knowledge and life experience to his classes, workshops, and presentations. Hari also has an 800-hour yoga teacher certification from the Jivamukti Yoga School and has been teaching yoga and meditation classes in and around the Washington, D.C. area for the past 15 years. He's also on the faculty of numerous yoga teacher training programs, offers live online workshops and courses throughout the year, which are very engaging, and is a frequent contributor to forums and magazines about the enduring relevance of yoga's ancient wisdom. So thank you, Hari, for starting off the conference, and welcome. I'm excited to get going.
Well, thank you, Christy. I'm excited to be here with you and looking forward to our conversation.
So let's kick it off with your clickbait title here. Why post-election personalism as opposed to just personalism? And what do we mean really by personalism in the first place?
Okay. Yes, as an online course creator, becoming good at coming up with clickbait titles for your courses and talks is just goes with the territory. I hope I have succeeded once again in that respect. So what I mean by this title, post-election personalism, first personalism, I'll borrow a little bit from Swami Padmanabha's book on radical personalism by saying it's an approach to life that recognizes individualized existence as an essential feature of reality, that proposes that individuals are defined by their relationships and prioritizes loving relationships as the ultimate fulfillment of individualized existence. So when I say personalism, that's pretty much what I have in mind. Post-election is an acknowledgement that we're living in a time of ideological polarization and that this actually can inform who we cultivate relationships with, what kind of relationships we have, and how we go about developing those relationships. So from the standpoint of putting this presentation in some context, the ideological differences that I'm speaking about exist within devotee communities. However, bridging such divisions within the devotee community is not really what I'm focusing this talk on. Some of the strategies that I speak about can be helpful in bridging those ideological divides within the devotee community, but this talk is going to be focused primarily on how to build relationships and credibility with people on the periphery of our devotional community and beyond, in pursuance of Srila Prabhupada's mission to deliver the message of Lord Chaitanya to Western countries, and specifically America, the United States of America, because that's where I am and that's where we are. And that's, from a cultural standpoint, where I am qualified to engage with people, and therefore that's what I'm focused on. I'm not really so concerned with the Hare Krishna movement worldwide. So my interest is in finding ways to introduce our ideas into the marketplace of ideas, gain credibility for our philosophy in terms of how it relates to people's real lived experiences in the here and now in this particular place, demonstrate how spiritual solutions can be applied to material problems, and primarily establish how spiritual ideas from our tradition can provide a solid foundation for social action. Now, there are some devotees who are well suited to share Krishna consciousness with people who are oriented towards conservative values, which should come as no surprise because our philosophy shares some values that are generally identified as conservative values. Jonathan Haidt does a wonderful presentation on how to identify conservative and liberal values. As a resource, I highly recommend his talk. His TED Talk is easy to find on YouTube. Progressive Vaishnavas, we are progressive Vaishnavas here, so I think it's reasonable to assume that someone who identifies more as a progressive Vaishnava is going to be well suited for sharing Krishna consciousness with people who are oriented toward more liberal values, because we see those values as a foundation for ethical guidance that points to moral decision-making and action that points in a progressive socio-political direction. So that's the basic premise of my talk.
Well, that's not something that people always connect, I think, sort of how do we take our spiritual foundation into social action, and what does that really mean? So tell me more about that. What do you mean by, seeing our values as a foundation for ethical guidance? Give me some examples.
From the standpoint of how we connect outside of the devotee community, our philosophy gives rise to meaning. Meaning gives rise to values. Values give rise to ethical guidelines. Ethical guidelines give rise to moral decision making. So there's a sequence here where our philosophy provides a foundation for engagement. And so in this case, I'm not defining progressive Vaishnavism as devotees who don't think you have to wear dhotis and saris to be wearing spiritual clothes. Some devotees may think of progressive Vaishnavism in that sort of way, and I'm just making a general idea here. Mm-hmm. I'm thinking more in terms of engaged Vaishnavism with progressive politics or progressive social programs, or just a progressive mindset. So here's a couple of examples of how that might work. According to our philosophy, there are 4 divinely inspired varnas, or social divisions. And I have heard it argued persuasively that this is one of the most valuable things that we have in our philosophy to connect us to society at large. There's a value associated with this social organization, which is the equitable distribution of wealth throughout the society for the sake of social harmony. That's one of the ways the 4 varnas are supposed to work. So the ethical guideline here is that only the Vaishyas, only the entrepreneurs pay taxes. And I have somewhere around here a direct quote from A.C. Bhaktivedanta Swami Prabhupada about how that's supposed to work. It's a flat rate, 25% of profits. He didn't qualify that as profit, after expenses or what have you. We leave that to the accountants.
Yeah.
We'll leave that to the accountants to figure out. But I understand it is, once you've paid the expenses, whatever your profit is, 25% of that goes to pay taxes. No fancy accounting tricks, no offshore accounts, no carry forwards, none of this, shenanigans that accountants get paid real money for, especially if you have real money. So the redistribution of wealth according to everyone's needs is how the system is supposed to work. And if this sounds a little bit like socialism, it's because it is. It doesn't mean that the Shudras, the workers, own the means of production, but it does mean that the owners of the means of production are supposed to pay into the system at this flat rate, and then the government, the Kshatriyas, are supposed to redistribute that wealth according to everyone's needs, and that is also a direct quote from Srila Prabhupada. Go ahead.
We should pause there because we have a global audience, and I don't know if folks who aren't as like entrenched in the American media sort of will appreciate right off the bat how much of a dirty word socialism has become in the United States, despite the fact that some of the folks who will say things like that then also want their government programs very much, or, don't understand otherwise.
Right.
Don't understand the connection between like, hey, I pay taxes, therefore I have roads that are updated and, fire services and police services. So there's a disconnect and a low level of civic engagement, but particularly for folks who might be listening to this recording or, listening to it live in
Yes.
Western European countries or, other countries that are founded more on a socialist basis, we're talking about something that's a very uniquely American issue, I think. So just wanted to pause there.
Yes, and a good point. Yeah, for those of you who are outside of the United States of America, we have socialism. It's for rich people. It's when big financial institutions need to be bailed out because they engaged in lending practices that were practically designed to fail. Then the government gives them lots of taxpayer money to make sure that they can stay in business. However, for working class people, they have to pay taxes, and they are not just workers, but consumers. Their job is to buy as many things as possible to A, drive the economy, and B, keep them distracted from how they're getting ripped off by the government that has socialist policies for the big financial institutions. Anyway, so, but the word socialism, yes, nobody except for one congresswoman from New York and a senator from Vermont can get elected to public office in the United States if they use the word socialism insofar as advocating for any kind of economic policy is concerned. It's the next worst thing to communism, and from a perception standpoint, it's not an idea that has ever really been well received throughout American history.
Yeah. We're going to talk about that a little bit more as we get into sort of examples through this talk, I think. But yeah, we see this in Kamala Harris's messaging that, lots of progressive liberals on the political side have been surprised by the shift to the right. And it goes to this sort of, no, I'm not a socialist. Like every one of her policies is talking about like socialist kind of aims, enabling housing, enabling, this opportunity economy that she talks about. But it's like it's a veiled attempt to make socialism more appealing and to sort of show folks how it's in their best interest. But let's talk more about getting back to how does our philosophy underpin these kind of ideas that provide this sort of moral code, if you will, and can help us where we end up on the political spectrum.
Well, then here is a second example of how this works. And this is of particular importance to the Hare Krishna movement, at least as far as I am concerned. Our philosophy is a non-sectarian science of God realization. It is not a sectarian religion. And Srila Prabhupada went to great pains to make sure that we understood this. He bristled any time his disciples tried to turn him into a sectarian religious leader. And that means that our philosophy gives rise to a value, which is freedom of religion, and especially for us, freedom to express our faith in public, to use public spaces for Sankirtan, for Harinam, for Rath Yatra, for etc. So ethically, we are directed toward actively defending society from an authoritarian, religious, extremist regime. You know, you can't go out on Harinam in Iran, and you aren't going to be very public about Krishna consciousness in China, or any country that suppresses freedom of religion. Therefore, the moral decision is to vote for candidates who support what we have in America, in the United States, what is known as the separation between church and state. This is enshrined in the First Amendment of the United States Constitution. The government shall make no establishment of a particular religion, that's called the Establishment Clause, nor will the government impinge on anyone's freedom to practice the religion of their choice. It's not worded precisely that way, and I forgot the name of that clause, but that's the second part. And this separation between church and state is the political existential condition, along with conveniently timed liberalization of immigration law, for A.C. Bhaktivedanta Swami Prabhupada to come to the United States and establish the Hare Krishna movement in the West in the first place. And I have a quote from Bhaktivinoda Thakur that I'll share with you to this point. Chaitanya preaches equality of men, universal fraternity amongst men, and special brotherhood amongst Vaishnavas, who are, according to him, the best pioneers of spiritual improvement. He preaches that human thought should never be allowed to be shackled with sectarian views. The religion preached by Mahaprabhu is universal and not exclusive. The most learned and the most ignorant are both entitled to embrace it. The principle of Kirtan invites, as the future church of the world, all classes of men without distinction of caste or clan to the highest cultivation of the spirit. So this is from Srila Bhaktivinoda Thakur's Chaitanya Mahaprabhu, His Life and Precepts. And therefore, we will be interested in supporting political candidates who are interested in defending this First Amendment enshrined guarantee of freedom of religion and freedom from religion, if one so desires. Now, if you're here in the United States of America, I hope that you are painfully well aware of the rise of white Christian nationalism and the efforts of people aligned with this cause to erase this protection. And if you already live in a state dominated by politicians who do not believe in this separation between church and state, then you are already experiencing the breakdown of this division insofar as what is being taught in public schools, what you are expected to buy into, whether you like it or not, insofar as religious belief is concerned. And as a one of the strange anomalies of the United States is that our nation's capital, Washington, D.C., is not its own independent state. It is, to a very large degree, subject to the decisions of the federal government insofar as our financing or policies and whatnot like that. So now that the federal government will be populated by a good many people dedicated to this idea that that the United States of America is a Christian nation and public displays of religiosity should be confined to this Christian identity, we may very well see this same kind of restriction trying to be enacted here in Washington, D.C., even though the population of Washington, D.C. has no interest in such things. So, so our election just passed was a very clear choice. It was very well publicized that the authors of a manual for the deconstruction of the federal government and the institution of the so-called Christian values directly embedded into the federal government, known as Project 2025, since renamed to something 47. It was a pretty clear choice for anyone who was truly aware of the implications of this. So that's two examples of how, when you, at least when I connect the dots between our philosophy, our values, and moral decision-making and engagement in the world, at least in this part of the world, that's where the chips fall, and that's where I feel called to take action.
Yeah, I feel like, well, so thank you for sharing all of that. I mean, again, trying to go to a global audience and those, for even for those who are not as politically engaged here, we can debate, you know, why did people vote the way that they did? Were they really focused on Project 2025 or not? And I think we'll come back to ideas of discernment and how do we connect in our real lives, you know, and make sure that we understand what's going on and that we are following through social action informed by these principles. But first, I'm trying to think of like, okay, what is the Krishna consciousness perspective on this? Like, how does this message kind of differ a little bit from what a lot of people are told about going out on Harinam and preaching? And the concept of Samadarshana comes to mind. So, you know, Krishna consciousness is for everyone. Why would we even make this distinction, even talk about this ideological polarization, much less sort of, you know, follow it and sort of think about how do our shared values guide us in one direction? Now, we've kind of taken that step with progressive Vaishnavism, forming a group dedicated to those ideals in the first place. But I want to talk more about like, why would we follow that path? Why would we engage with some people and not others? So, like, doesn't it compromise our spiritual authority to take such a strong ideological position in a world where we are supposed to be ministering to everyone, where our audience is on both sides?
So the subtitle of this presentation contained the phrase meaningful relationships, I believe. And that's why. So yes, Krishna consciousness is for everyone in the sense that Lord Chaitanya has given the world an open invitation to join in his Sankirtan party. But my audience is not on both sides. Spiritual authority is inseparable from moral authority. And the ideological divisions that we see can be understood in terms of each side seeing the moral defects of the other. Yeah. Now, when I think of moral defects, I wonder how it is that Donald Trump could have been a viable a candidate for president from the very get-go. One of his very first press conferences, or I believe it was a press conference, he was asked a question by a journalist, Serge Kovaleski, from the New York Times, who has a disability. And the first thing Trump did was make fun of his disability. There is a quote that's now circulating around once again from a guy named Zach Bornstein, a writer-director, who said, "Until the day I die, I will never understand how this wasn't the end of it," referring to this obvious moral disqualification of making fun of somebody with a disability.
They
So,
could say that about so many things, so many points in time, so many incidents of different conduct or behavior, not just by Trump, but by his surrogates that, like, why is this not disqualifying? How do people not, immediately say, okay, I'm not going to listen to anything else you say, and you have no business being in public office. Yeah.
yeah. Trump was endorsed by the Ku Klux Klan. What more do you need to know?
I mean, I'm from Louisiana. David Duke got elected when I was a child after being endorsed by the Ku Klux Klan. So that I'm like, okay, you recognize the world that we're living in. Yes, but it's
Right.
scary.
So to me, this is just a gigantic moral failure. And to someone who somehow or other connects the dots in a different way, the radical left woke liberals are the ones who have engaged in this in some kind of moral failure that justifies supporting what looks to me like a monstrous moral failure. And that's the divide. That's the world we live in, is this information siloed, culturally divided sense of morality. And this variance, once again, Swami Padmanabha has a nice way of phrasing this variance in perception. In his book, he said, "What may disturb someone's faith will nourish someone else's." And I personally cannot inspire faith in a person who is living in that moral frame of reference on the other side of the divide. I just can't.
And there's a
As
certain
the
level of
great,
cognitive dissonance on that side too that we can't overcome, and we see that in a very tangible way, just in um, uh, like proselytizing to meat eaters about vegetarianism. Like if it's not, there's a certain amount of cognitive dissonance that has to go on to eat meat in the first place. That's almost impossible to break into. Like the whole, you can't use logic to get out of arguments that you didn't get into with logic in the first place. So it seems like you're talking about the same kind of thing. It's really hard to battle that cognitive dissonance in an authentic way if you're starting from polar opposite ends of the spectrum.
we have to start with at least some shared agreement in order to move forward towards a meaningful transformation that people will buy into. And so if we're starting from a place of division, of non-agreement on a fundamental starting point, then we're not going to get very far.
So I think maybe we do go a little bit too far in trying to make everything work in trying to make everything work for everyone. We then lose the authenticity of what we were seeking to create in the first place, and that's an issue that comes up in terms of, yes, the system we have is not perfect. We
Mm-hmm.
need to take these measures to make accommodations. Giving people equal rights is not giving someone extra rights. It's accommodating for a system that by itself will not fix itself. But that does not apply in reverse, right? It does not apply
Yes.
where you are trying in the first place to create like an exclusive space for people who need that exclusive space to exchange their ideas or to find camaraderie or to, further their own progress. So there's a time and a place for everything, I guess, and we need to be more discerning in sussing that out.
We can ask ourselves the question, whose faith can we nourish? Realistically, the great sage Clint Eastwood once said, "A man has got to know his limitations." And I think that's good advice. I know who I am well suited to speak to based on this relationship between spiritual authority and moral authority. Uh, if I were to compromise one, the other would crumble. So people who share our values, who have a shared sense of how those values translate into ethical imperatives, moral decisions, personal practices, and community engagement, those are the people whose faith we can nourish. If you try to be all things to all people, you end up being nothing to nobody, and it comes off as very inauthentic. You can easily start to wander into the territory of spiritual bypassing, et cetera. So we should know which Vaishnava values, such as the four pillars of Dharma, animate us the most, and how we connect the dots so that we can constructively engage on the basis of shared values and shared assumptions about what constitutes a problem that's actually in need of a solution, as opposed to a problem that no one thinks is a problem, which oftentimes is our starting point.
Yes, and it's interesting to think about how this over-indexing on inclusivity can happen in Krishna consciousness. Like I can see someone saying, "Oh, you're just taking the easy way out. Like, shouldn't you be challenging yourself as a Vaishnava to make this message as universally appealing as we think it is? Isn't that a moral imperative?" But it seems like what you're really saying is the most, if like you're talking about, we can't cover the world with one pamphlet. Like, what's the most effective way to go about this? Is that the right way to think about it?
Yeah, for some people, uh, just distributing books to everybody who you can get to stop without qualifying them as someone you can actually have a meaningful relationship with, that's fine. You can do that. I think we have a better chance of making a real difference in individuals' lives and making a difference socially. We have a better shot at incrementally, culturally re-spiritualizing human society when we work on the basis of meaningful relationships, which means acting according to our own svadharma, our own conditioned nature, utilizing our strength and abilities in service. This way is actually more efficient. So yeah, I am well positioned, and due to my own natural aptitudes and inclinations, I am qualified to speak to a certain kind of person. And there are other devotees who, by virtue of their natural aptitudes and inclinations and their orientation to the world and their svadharma, they're going to talk to somebody else. So I think that's what we should be doing. We are not all required to be all things to all people. We can be a specific thing to a specific kind of person, and some other devotee can be a specific thing to some other kind of person. And in this way, we are all leveraging our natures in service to Krishna and in service to Srila Prabhupada's movement.
It feels like a very freeing concept, right? And very much in line with what we're taught, but what it's hard to put into practice sometimes. Um, Going back to both building meaningful relationships and the post-election part of this, we've talked about sort of what we can and should be doing, thinking about our own individual strengths and abilities, and then how do we dovetail that into, what we are doing in the spread of Krishna consciousness. But how do we make sure that we are actually building meaningful relationships? I'm thinking about this from a political spectrum where a lot of there was this great movement among Democrats of excitement and joy when Kamala Harris first, stepped into the position of her candidacy for president. Um, and people felt like, okay, now we have a chance. But there's a lot of analysis on the moderate right coming out post-election about sort of where did the Democrats fall flat? Like, why did this message that seems to make so much sense to those of us with progressive values, why did that fall apart? Why did that not resonate? I think there is, from what I'm seeing, some element of this inauthenticity that you've been talking about, like the trying to be everything to everyone, moving to the right. But there also seems to be an undercurrent of very clear from the right and moderate right, like not extreme side of MAGAism, but like you're just not listening to the people you're trying to
Mm-hmm.
speak to and trying to help and trying to show that your policies are really in line with what their values are. There's a disconnect there. And it's kind of illusory to Democrats who are trying to formulate messaging and content. And so on the one hand, I'm kind of like, well, if a major political party can't do it, how can we? But like, what basis do we have for helping to make sure that we're engaging in that listening part? And how do we go about really doing that?
Yeah, that's a really good question. It's true that the enthusiasm level on the Democratic side after Kamala Harris entered the presidential race was sky high, and I saw that firsthand. I have not had the time nor the mental emotional bandwidth to read the 36 different analyses I'm seeing in the New York Times and Slate and Vox and everywhere else about how the Democrats did not win this election or what went wrong with Kamala Harris's campaign. To me, it is a great mystery. You should be able to beat this guy with a Pez dispenser. I don't get it, and it drives me nuts. I could easily fill the time we have with my critique of the Democratic National Committee and the Democratic Party here in the United States, and I will spare all of you everything I have to say about that. Relationships are two-way streets, and one critique I heard a little bit about came from Senator Bernie Sanders, independent senator from Vermont, who said, if you abandon the working class, don't be surprised when the working class abandons you. Active listening is an important part of a relationship. And once you get past what I think are the obvious moral issues, the practical issues of how are you feeling left behind? What is it that you no longer have that you want? Or what's the kitchen table issue that isn't really being addressed, that sort of thing. Yeah, I'm all in favor for active listening with to reasonable people uh, who have legitimate concerns for the sake of understanding. There are some times when I attempt to engage in these conversations that doesn't really happen. That what I find myself confronted with is a worldview that, from its very starting point, is a different and conflicting worldview from the one that I have come up with to the best of my ability, using whatever God-given gift of perception, deference to authority, logic, all the things that make up our epistemology, pramana. And conflicting worldviews cannot be resolved, which is why it is so hard to find peace in the Middle East, because your starting point is two worldviews that are in conflict with one another. So engagement is first and foremost understanding the people you're engaging with, and that means developing communication skills, asking questions, echoing back the answer to make sure you actually understood what you heard. And one of the things that I got wrong was I thought, in the case of Kamala Harris, she had a coalition that ranged from the most liberal congresswoman to one of the most conservative congresswomen, and therefore a broad coalition that I thought was appealing to a wide swath of people. But that turned out not to be a big enough coalition. So this idea of trying to be everything to everyone, that's going to make your message fall flat.
Yeah.
The other part, the failure to listen is talking a lot about high-minded ideals, grappling with complex concepts without addressing basic issues, and telling people what the problem is when they think they've got a different problem.
Right. We talked about that a little bit in our notes, our prep leading up to this. The thing that jumps out to me is this YouTube video on sort of effective persuasion and salesmanship, like selling a pen. Like you tell somebody, sell me a pen, and most people will start off by saying, this is a great pen. They'll pick up a pen and say, like, look at all the features of this pen. But it's not effective, because you're telling someone, you're talking in a vacuum, right? And you're talking, not listening. Whereas the most effective sales pitches start off with questions. How long you been in the market for a pen? What kind of pen do you typically use? How much money do you typically want to spend on a pen? How many pens do you need? What features, of the pens that you've had in the past do you like? What features do you not like? Is there any like problem you're trying to solve here? Like, if you could design like the best pen ever, what would this be? Like, you
What's a
don't,
pen?
huh? What's
What's
a
a pen?
Like, you don't start off with this immediate sort of preachiness of, I mean, I guess it works for some people because we saw that work on the right, but like, I am the answer to all of your problems that you didn't know you had. I think the way the right was effective on that is tapping into something very deep-seated, a very deep-seated understanding of what folks feel like their problems are. But when we ask folks, to your point of, hey, think about others, think about, the good we can do in the world and all these, like, you can't start there. You have to start off with like, how you doing?
Yeah, what do you need?
Going on in your life? What do you need? And then you can think about and tailor your message to, okay, how can I plant seeds that explain sort of how this person's needs and what they're looking for might kind of sort of be addressed, and then sort of let them come to you. And we talked about receptivity. And I would love for you to talk about, in your personal experience of teaching yoga in the Washington, D.C. area, how has this worked out for you?
Um, so it's by Krishna's grace surprisingly well. If you begin with the answer to a question your audience is already asking, which is not going to be necessarily how many pens do I need, or that sort of thing, but you find out what question are they asking, then you give them an answer. So if someone is wondering what is the best way to do X, well, that's the question they're already asking. So you begin with the best way to do X is Y. Then from there, you can offer up some understanding of what what this why is about. And because it's a new idea, when you start from the shared agreement, you can move to the problem that they didn't know they had, or the question they should be asking about the obstacle that is keeping them from realizing their desire, or getting what they want. So, for example, you can say the best way to feel a personal connection with divinity is by chanting a mantra made of made of divine names. Then you can state something everyone agrees is true. We all have a spark of divinity within us. Now, in the yoga community, that's going to be an easy sell. It's the conception of divinity within us that differs. That's the variable. So then you could say, the problem is that our conception of divinity erases our personhood. Because if we're all one, then we're no longer individual people. What if there was a way to connect with divinity in such a way that preserved your personhood on a spiritual level?
Eureka.
Here we go. Now, you've addressed a truth that everyone accepts is true. You've identified a problem. One of the reasons why non-dualistic philosophy falls flat with a lot of people, and so they kind of go through the motions without really committing to it, because nobody wants to really give up being a person. So you've identified the unspoken question. You've identified the problem and said, what if there was a solution to that? Now you can introduce mantra meditation made up of names of a supreme divinity that you now have to conceptualize for greater understanding. That instead of thinking you are this person, or this person is part of you, which we hear an awful lot in contemporary yoga. You flip it and you say, you are part of this person. And this personal feature of the absolute emphasizes beauty and love rather than majesty and power, and therefore welcomes a relationship that can happen in a super safe space, otherwise known as the spiritual world, spiritual consciousness. Okay, so that's an example of how this kind of relationship building and solving a problem that everyone can agree on based on a shared agreement in the first place, that's an example of how that might work. And that's how it's been working for me as a yoga teacher for the past 15 years.
I had a colleague once, and of course you can always move along the spectrum there. I now am the general counsel of a company that is focused on putting more electric vehicles on the road. So I moved into a more conducive space to this, right? But I had a colleague once who was really, really annoyed by like people who weren't getting our message, and like, we had an agreement that just didn't work or whatever. And, I'm trying to help him work through this. And he says, how are you so calm about this? There's my opening.
There you go. That's right.
I am calm because I try to approach the world with a sense of equanimity. And the practices that I have in my life that help to inform that sense of equanimity are, and using non-threatening words like meditation instead of like chanting. But there's a way I think that we can, that starts by living by example, right? Like we have to actually be doing the things that help us to be in that position where the people are going to look to us as the calm amidst the storm, the ones who can help to guide, the ones who have the, wise philosophy to give. But it's not always as satisfying because it still feels like living a little bit of a double life, but it does sort of allow for that inkling of, introduction of these ideas, I guess, into an environment like that. Doesn't always work, but an idea. What do you think about that?
I think it's a very good illustration of the principle of being patient, being yourself, and waiting for someone to ask you a question. You're not looking for the opportunity to artificially insert something into the conversation. What you're doing is you're waiting, unless you are, in an environment where people are expecting you to say something, to take the initiative. But if it's a collaborative environment where that, isn't the expectation, you wait. And eventually someone asks you a question. And that's the person that you now have the potential to develop a meaningful relationship with. And because they value equanimity, they want to be able to do their job without losing their mind. Now you've got a shared value.
Yeah, we've got an identified problem and a potential solution, but
and here's the other thing. All you have to do is plant a seed. That's it. So many times we think we have to deliver the whole philosophy to someone the first chance we get. If you swing for the fences every single time you come to the plate, you will strike out a lot. If, on the other hand, you bunt for base hits or hit singles, move the runner over. All of you from outside of the United States who don't understand baseball analogies, this is what I'm talking about. It's not cricket. I don't know how cricket works. I've watched cricket. I absolutely have no idea what is going on. And I'm actually kind of a sports junkie. But it is like one of the great sports mysteries to me is what the hell is going on in cricket. I can understand Australian football even better than cricket. Anyway, play small ball. Just look for the opportunity to plant a seed. Don't think that every time you get an opening, now is your chance to tell someone to chant Hari Krishna and go back to the spiritual world.
Yeah, that's fair. And that's an undercurrent of what we've been talking about this whole time that we didn't really address. I'm glad you brought that up, that this is the long game. This is, it takes patience, it takes work, it takes perseverance and judgment.
Yes,
Um, yes, and when you think about the going back to the title of building meaningful relationships, that's the way you build a meaningful relationship anyway. This doesn't happen overnight. And then you
right.
have that receptivity. Sometimes that does take it takes finding these moments of shared connection, but it also takes time. It takes a buildup of trust.
Yes, people get to know you, they get to like you, they get to trust you. Now you have the standing to share something with them. I'll tell a little story that I think a lot of people can relate to, but I also was thinking we have a few people who might be live with us who might have a question that they can pop into the comment on the Facebook feed. There's nothing there right this moment, but if anyone has something. So, when I first became a devotee, when I first read Srila Prabhupada's books and I saw the devotees and went to the temple and I thought, this is definitely not for me. This sounds more like fairy tales than even mythology. It's very emo. It's for girls. I was more attracted to Taoism and Zen, the austerity of just sitting in front of a wall for like hours at a time. That's where I was at. And later, I think by some act of extraordinary grace, I found myself in a position where I started to get a taste for chanting. I definitely had a taste for prasadam. I started hanging out with the devotees, and I discovered, oh, wait, there is a deep, comprehensive, logical philosophy that justifies the conclusion that God is a little blue flute playing cowherd boy. That's nuts, but I can't deny it. And so
Yep.
now I turn around to my friends and say, hey, guess what I just discovered? And I'm thinking, hey, this is me talking. We have like a relationship where like I should have some standing with you that when I say this makes sense, you should at least give it a moment's consideration. And of course, anyone who's gone through this has had their friends and family say, you've taken one hit of acid too many. You have lost your mind.
Yep.
No, I don't think so, etc. So it now that these same friends and family members, they're like, all right, well, I can see how that made sense to you, but that was like that took 45 years.
Well, I think we actually have covered, I think we've gone the allotted time, maybe 1 minute over, if I look at what the other, timeframes are for the other speakers. And I think we've covered what we wanted to cover. Is there anything else that comes up through the course of the conversation or any other things we haven't covered that you think we should touch on more?
Not that I can think of. If anyone is watching this or listening to this now or after the fact and wants to connect with me, if something comes up later, I am easily available through social media on Facebook and Instagram. Send me a message. And I will always be happy to hear from anyone who does have a question or a comment or wants to explore any of this further. But I think that we've covered quite a bit, and I, for one, have had everything I have to say about this.
Well, I will second your offer of connection, and we'll put in a plug for your workshops and classes, having taken several myself. I think it's interesting to see in those classes this sort of process playing out because I think that you tend to attract folks who are both beginning their spiritual exploration journey and folks stick with you through that journey. And so you have folks that have varying levels of understanding and engagement in those classes, and offer something for everyone, but authentically, and allow us to sort of explore our own process through those classes. So I found it very helpful, and I hope that others take advantage of your availability as well to further drill down into these ideas with you.
All right. Christy, thank you so much. This was a lot of fun.
Thank you so much. And thanks to the organizers of the Progressive Vaishnavism Conference. We've been happy to kick things off, and we look forward to seeing what the other speakers have to say throughout the rest of the weekend.
Yes, I'm looking forward to that too.
Okay,
All right.
thank you so much.
You're welcome so much. Haribol.
All right, Ball.